My name is Nickel, Nickel, and today we're going to resort to the old school. A guy named Sonics left a comment on one of my videos about how hard it is to get any traction on YouTube, so I thought I would showcase one of his videos to help him out. Since I wouldn't have been able to get a video out for today anyway, he's going to be filling in for me. So here it is, a brand new video, Pokemon Yellow 5 Weird Facts. And remember, if you guys enjoyed this video, definitely consider subscribing to him via the link down below in the description.
Thanks, Nickel. Hey guys, Sonics here. Pokemon Yellow version. It's difficult to find the words to describe just how much this game means to me. Known as Special Pikachu Edition in Japan, it first saw release in 1999 for the US, followed by a year later in the UK. It was the first Pokemon game I played, and here I am 16 years later, still playing. Despite its late appearance into the Game Boy's lifespan, Pokemon Yellow version was actually one of the highest selling games for the system. With the success of Red and Blue version as well as the booming popularity for the anime, Yellow version was designed to closely follow the story of Ash throughout the Kanto region. Many aspects from the show were adapted to the game to allow players to mirror his journey. Instead of choosing between the starters, for example, you can actually receive them as gifts throughout your adventure. It also gave Game Freak a chance to solidify their previous versions and address complaints that Red and Blue received. So for myself, and I'm sure many of you, Pokemon Yellow is really where it began. With Generation 7 on the horizon, I thought it'd be nice to turn back time and revisit Pokemon Yellow and bring you 5 things you may or not know about the special version. Let's take a look. Number 5. An earlier release date. During Generation 1, Game Freak were under immense financial pressure due to the constant delays of their games. It's reported that several employees left the company during this period due to the financial problems, despite the success of Red and Green in fact. As a result, some snap decisions were made between Nintendo and Game Freak in an attempt to cash in on the first Pokemon movie, which was released 2 months prior. One of these decisions was to bring forward the release of Yellow to maximise marketing and take advantage of Pokemania. Hey, who can blame them after Pikachu's tears in that movie? Tear-jerking. The initial release was meant circa December time as opposed to the September release. Due to the earlier date, however, Japan's version was not compatible with the Game Boy Color, which was released in October 1998. Japan's version follows a standard yellow palette if played on the system, unlike the localized versions which displayed many towns and sprites in full diverse colours. An interview Junichi Masuda, programmer for Yellow version, he explained that Yellow was intended to be released with many of the existing glitches removed or fixed, but for various reasons, the team didn't have as much time as they would have liked. One of the reasons was the already confirmed sequels in Pokemon Gold and Silver. Sadly for Game Freak, this was to be the start of many occasions where time constraints impacted their final versions of the games, but let's save that for another video. Number 4. Safari differences. Most people tend to have a love-hate relationship with the Safari Zone. The mechanics, whilst interesting, can be very frustrating to deal with, especially if you want to catch them all. Some Pokemon are just so uncommon that even finding them is a chore, never mind catching them. In Yellow version, however, the Safari Zone is actually slightly different to the ones in the other games. If you recall, Ash encounters and captures a lot of Tauros in the first season of the anime, and stores them with Professor Oak. In Red and Blue, however, Tauros is actually quite the rare sight. As a result, its encounter rate was up from 4% to 10% to better reflect Ash's ability to find so many. You can also find a Dragonair in the waters by fishing in Yellow version, which was not previously available in Red or Blue. This is again another reference to the anime where in episode 5 of the first season, a Dragonair is featured. It doesn't stop there with the special treatment however, and this is handy if you're ever short of cash. If you have less than the entrance fee for the Safari Zone and persist in asking the god if you can enter, he will eventually allow you entry with the decreased amount of Safari Balls. You can even enter the area when you have no money whatsoever. If you persist enough, the god will eventually allow you to enter with a single Safari Ball. Just be sure to make that count as you'll have to leave if you waste it. Number 3. Bad early reviews. The early reviews for Pokemon Yellow didn't exactly cover it in glory. Suffice to say the reviews have since changed, with many credible sites giving it a 9.2 out of 10. But it wasn't always the case. Many Japanese magazines and media sources stated that the game didn't bring anything new to the table and lacked features outside of the already existing games in Red and Blue. It was labelled as a stopgap between Gold and Silver, the eagerly anticipated sequels of the series which had just been delayed. A large complaint the game received was the belief in forcing too many Pokemon onto the players such as the free starters. It was said that many players would simply opt for the same core team in Pikachu, Charmander, Bulbasaur and Squirtle simply due to their availability, resulting in many players having the same team. Once the game was released however, the reviews changed, with many critics labelling the game the most complete in the series to date, with the sales of Pokemon Yellow version almost reaching 15 million and confirming it as the best-selling third or sister version of a generation thus far, it's correct to say that the reviews didn't really matter in the end. Number 2. Surf's Up Pikachu. If you've ever played Yellow version, there's a good chance you will know there's a Surfing Pikachu minigame to enjoy. Well, did you know that you can still play it? It's called Pikachu's Beach, and yes, you can still play it after all these years. You can play it on the Virtual Console release easy enough, as it's already unlocked, though if you want to roll back the years and use a Game Boy Color, here's how. You'll need a copy of Pokemon Stadium and the ability to transport your Pikachu to the Nintendo 64 version using a transport pack. You'll need to beat the Prime Cup Master Division in your copy of Stadium with Pikachu as one of your free Pokemon. This is no easy task as you'll be facing some pretty tough Pokemon. Number 1. Friendship and Features. Pokemon Yellow version really did bring a lot to the table. It fixed a lot of what was wrong with Red and Blue versions, but it also brought us new features that we still find today. Yellow version was the first glimpse into friendship with a Pokemon, for example, which is needed to evolve certain Pokemon in later games. The friendship meter with your Pikachu is also unique, as it triggers certain in-game events. For example, the Bulbasaur in Cerulean City if Pikachu likes you enough. The many faces of our Pikachu as he grew throughout our journey really gave Yellow version a very personal touch. We also had the chance to walk alongside him, offering a real ability to get to know him and understand him. We didn't get this chance again until Heart Gold and Soul Silver, and today it remains unique to these 3 games. Yellow version was really the standout version for me in Generation 1, so when the Virtual Console releases came out, it was really nice to revisit the familiar places and sprites. Did you notice how I referred to Pikachu as him? Well, gender wasn't introduced until Generation 2, but if you trade him to Gold, Silver or Crystal, Pikachu has an 87.5 chance of being male, and a 12.5 chance of being female. This is the usual ratio for starter Pokemon, though Pikachu outside of Generation 1 has a typical 50 to 50% ratio of either gender. Bonus fact. I hope you enjoyed these 5 facts about Yellow version, guys, and I've shown you just how much this game means to me. A big thanks to Onicle for a chance to feature on his channel, and if you'd like to see more of my Pokemon related content, consider subscribing to me using the button on screen. Please support Onicle by leaving a like on this video, and until next time trainers, take care.
Thanks again, Sonics, and make sure you guys do check out his channel. You should be able to click directly on the screen whether you're on mobile or PC. So this might be the only time we do this for a while, but I thought this would be a cool way to introduce you guys to new YouTube content. Because when we tried to do the shoutout thing before, it seemed like it kind of turned into a mess. So maybe this will be a bit more effective. Also, if you have information-based content that you think would be really interesting to have featured, come on over to the Discord server, which is linked down below in the description, and let me know. Thanks a lot for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time.